Today, we are digging into one of the oldest and most profound stories in all of world literature. It's a story that asked a question so deep it has puzzled and inspired people for literally thousands of years. Why do good people suffer? This is the story of the Book of Job. I mean, just think about that for a second. This question is the engine that drives the entire story. It's an unflinching look at fairness, faith, and the really terrifying idea that maybe, just maybe, suffering has nothing to do with what you deserve. All right, so first, let's meet the man himself, Job. The story goes out of its way to make one thing crystal clear from the very first line. This isn't just a good guy. This is a man who seems to have the perfect life, a man who has done everything right. Yeah, the text leaves zero room for doubt here. His character is presented as the absolute peak of righteousness, perfect and upright. He respects God and actively avoids doing wrong. You need to remember this, because it's the foundation of the whole conflict. Job is blameless. And his worldly blessings, they're just as flawless. We're not just talking about being comfortable here. Look at this list. This is unbelievable wealth for the ancient world. Thousands upon thousands of animals, a massive household, and 10 children. The story calls him the greatest of all the men of the East. He's at the absolute top. But while Job is down on earth, living his seemingly perfect life, the scene cuts, and it cuts hard, to a very different place, the heavenly court. And this, right here, is where everything is about to go terribly, terribly wrong. So picture this cosmic meeting. God proudly points out Job, basically saying, "Look at this guy, he's the best." But then this character called Ha-Satan, which in Hebrew means the accuser or the adversary, steps up with a really cynical challenge. He basically says, "Sure, Job's faithful now. Why wouldn't he be? You've given him everything." He argues Job's faith is just a transaction. Take away all his stuff, the accuser bets, and he will curse you to your face. And in a twist that is just shocking, God agrees to the test. This is the moment that changes everything. God gives the accuser permission to completely destroy everything Job owns, with only one rule: you can't physically hurt Job himself. So the wager is set. Back on Earth, Job is totally oblivious. He has no idea about the cosmic bet that just sealed his fate. But he is about to feel the consequences, and they are immediate, they are brutal, and they are unbelievably fast. The speed of this is just horrifying. In a single day, 4 messengers arrive, one right after the other, each one cutting the last one off with even worse news. First, his livestock are stolen. Then, his sheep are burned up by a fire of God. Then his camels are taken. And then, the final unthinkable blow. A massive storm collapses the house where his children were, killing all 10 of them, all at once. And what is Job's response to losing absolutely everything in a single afternoon? Well, he mourns. He tears his clothes, he shaves his head. But he doesn't curse God. Instead, he says, "The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away." So the accuser, he loses the first round. But the accuser, he's not finished. He comes back and argues, well, a man will give up anything to save his own skin. So God allows a second test, and this time it gets personal. Job's own body is attacked. He's hit with these agonizing sores from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head, left to sit in a pile of ashes, literally scraping his own skin with a piece of broken pottery. Now at this point, the story kind of shifts gears. Job's 3 friends show up, and their plan is to comfort him. But what happens next is the longest part of the book, this intense poetic debate. The friends' logic is pretty simple. God is just, so people get what they deserve. You're suffering horribly, so you must have done something wrong. But Job just refuses to accept it. He holds on to his innocence and demands that God tell him why this is happening. One of his friends, Eliphaz, lays their argument out pretty plainly. For him, the universe is neat and tidy. Good gets rewarded, evil gets punished. Simple. He asks Job, who ever perished being innocent? And the implication there is just brutal. You're not innocent, Job. You must have some secret sin to deserve this. Job's response is just pure agony and frustration. You know, their simple, clean logic feels like an insult to him. He knows he's innocent. In their attempts to make him blame himself for his own tragedy, it's not comfort, it's just another kind of torture. So for chapter after chapter, they just argue in circles. Job gets more and more desperate, and his friends get more and more certain they're right. The human debate hits a total dead end. And then, a new voice joins the conversation. God finally speaks. But it's not in a gentle vision or a quiet whisper. Nope. He answers Job from the heart of a raging storm, a whirlwind, and his voice is anything but comforting. And here's the thing. God never actually answers Job's question. He never explains why it all happened. Instead, he fires back with a hurricane of questions of his own, starting with this one. It instantly shifts the whole conversation from Job's personal suffering to the mind-boggling scale of the entire cosmos. The questions just keep coming, one after another, and each one just hammers home this vast, vast gap between what a human being can possibly understand and the forces that actually run the universe. See, Job demanded a trial, he wanted an explanation, but what God gives him is a tour of creation. He's shown stars he can't control, wild animals that don't answer to him, forces of nature that are completely beyond him. This isn't an explanation for suffering, it's a lesson in cosmic humility.
So after this incredible, awe-inspiring, frankly terrifying display of cosmic power, how does Job respond? And how does this whole epic story finally wrap up? Humbled by the whirlwind, Job finally speaks. He drops his case against God. He admits, I was talking about things that are way too wonderful for me, things I couldn't possibly understand. Now, this isn't him admitting he sinned. It's him admitting that his human perspective is incredibly limited. And then the story wraps up with Job's fortunes getting restored, but in this strange, almost unsettlingly perfect way. His wealth isn't just replaced, it's exactly doubled. He's also given 10 new children. It's written like a happy ending, but honestly, the idea that you can just replace children raises some really profound and uncomfortable questions on its own. And that's how the narrative itself concludes. Job lives a long, long life, sees his family flourish for generations, and dies old and content. The storm has passed. So in the end, we're left with the echo of that whirlwind. The story gives Job his life back, but it denies him, and it denies us, a simple reason for why it was all taken away in the first place. It forces you to ask, is the point that faith will always be rewarded in the end? Or is the real point that true faith is what you need when you're facing a universe that is powerful, mysterious, and ultimately doesn't owe you any answers at all? That question, that's the legacy of the book of Job.